for a YouTube live talking about, well, really all things DB Cooper. I'm going to give a few minutes here for people to join on here, but I'm out here outside changing things up a little bit. Have a cigar in hand, so we're going to have a good time talking about all this stuff. So there's Nikki there. How you doing, brother? And let's see here. I should be able to read any kind of comments or questions that you have going on. As many of you probably know, I'm old enough where I kind of need these readers, and I try to avoid putting these things on. But nonetheless, if I have them here, if I need them, let me know if there's an issue with the audio or anything else. I've got it on the cell phone network, which seems to work better than the home network here. But I'm glad that you're joining in here, and we'll have some fun talking about all things DB Cooper. Digging the Commander shirt, that's exactly right. So Sophie's there as well. Let the party begin. There we go. So this is going to be fun. So I'm going to talk about basically where I am with my theories with respect to this. Hey, Mark, how you doing? And but at the same point, you know, this isn't supposed to be like a lecture or anything like that. I just kind of I figured I would take questions and just kind of, you know, just take this wherever the hell this thing goes, and throughout the evening, which I plan on keeping to an hour, maybe a little over an hour. I figure that'll give more than enough opportunity for me to kind of talk about where things are with my investigation into DB Cooper and where I think stand, where I believe that things stand today. So without much further ado here, cheers, let's get underway. I'm just drinking water tonight, though. It's a little warm outside, so I am sticking with water. I thought about grabbing a beer or something like that, and I'm like, nah, it's just a little too much. So, any case, and of course, if you've got any questions or what have you, comments, whatever, feel free to throw them up there. This is really more about you than it is about me. I like the idea of sort of engaging the people that are watching these things and having an opportunity to talk about things. And who knows, maybe somebody throws up something that I didn't think about before. Maybe somebody else hadn't occurred to somebody else before. And there you go. Maybe there's something new to be learned. You never know what's going to happen as far as this stuff goes. But as far as DB Cooper's concerned, let's start kind of at the beginning here. And like I said, feel free to pepper me with questions or comments or whatever at any point here. But, you know, the first thing is, you know, how he got to the airport, how he ended up in Portland. That's still a mystery, obviously. Nobody really knows how the guy showed up. He just showed up at the ticket counter there and decided to lay down a ticket, though. So, Fred, how you doing? Maybe Cooper came back for Money and Shoots. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I believe that DB Cooper actually flew into Portland probably an hour or so earlier in the day. And the main reason why really comes down to, well, there's a couple of things, but I think the biggest clue in my mind is that he didn't have any luggage. He didn't have any luggage at all. And so that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that he attempted to be the very last person to board the jet. Now, as fate would have it, he was the second to last person to board the jet because Bill Mitchell, the then 20-year-old college student who's a good friend of many of us in the DB Cooper world, Bill Mitchell was running really kind of late, and he boarded immediately behind Cooper. Now, on that day, they actually boarded via those air stairs that deploy from the back bottom of the fuselage. So the passengers had to walk across the tarmac and literally boarded the jet from the back like that. I actually believe I did that one time as well. Hey Seth, how you doing, brother? No, just drinking water. Just drinking water. But so again, I believe I actually did that one time as well. That would have been probably the 90s, probably somewhere in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, but I do recall doing that same thing as well. Now, I'm trying to keep this thing lit here. For those of you who are cigar smokers, you know what I'm talking about. So the thing is that when they boarded the jet, they boarded from the back. They boarded from the back. And so when they step on the plane, the first row of seats they see are the very back of the row, or very back of the jet, which is row 18. And I've always said that DB Cooper needed to really grab a seat in the very back of the jet in order to realistically have a chance to safely skyjack the jet. And given that he was essentially the very end of the passengers to board, he couldn't be certain that he didn't get on the jet in the back couple of rows didn't already have passengers. So if that had happened, I believe, and this is just speculation on my part, but I believe that this is likely the case. I believe that DB Cooper would have just simply walked up maybe toward the middle of the airplane, grabbed a seat, row 10, for example, and would have aborted the attempt to skyjack the jet. He would have just flown to Seattle as a normal passenger and would have deplaned in Seattle as a normal passenger. So if DB Cooper's deplaning in Seattle as a normal passenger because he had to abort and he didn't have any luggage with him, any change of clothes or anything, that tells me that he already had something set up in Seattle. In other words, it would have been very easy for him to just to walk off the jet. I believe he probably had a motel set up literally across the street from SeaTac, across the street from the airport, and he would have just simply gone to his motel and tried another day. And again, I don't know what the odds are of that happening, but I mean, I have to put it at probably about a 50-50 chance. I think there's about a 50-50 chance that there would have been people sitting in that back row there, several people or what have you. Now, as fate would have it, obviously, DB Cooper, it was wide open in the back, and he took a seat in the back. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, on the starboard side of the jet, and then Bill Mitchell, who entered right behind DB Cooper, actually sat in the back of the jet as well, but on the left-hand side. And the configuration, the seating configuration on the 727 was 3 seats, and then an aisle, and then 3 seats. So facing forward, DB Cooper's on the right-hand side of the jet, Bill Mitchell's on the left-hand side of the jet. They're the only two that were in the back of the jet there. So again, when you consider that he couldn't be certain that he wasn't going to abort the attempt, and also consider that he didn't have any luggage or change of clothes or anything with him, that suggests to me that he had something already set up in Seattle. Moreover, that makes a lot of sense if he caught a plane in Seattle earlier in the morning, caught a 36-minute flight from Seattle down to Portland for the express purpose of simply just turning around and flying back, a couple hours later. Now, it seems unlikely to me that he would have flown Northwest Orient down from Seattle to Portland, but who knows, maybe he did. So that's the first thing that I think, that's a pretty strong indication to me that DB Cooper probably started his day in Seattle and probably flew into Portland. And the other thing to consider here is that DB Cooper, the evidence as far as I understand it is crystal clear that DB Cooper intended to jump from the airplane with the money and everything else shortly after taking off from Seattle. So if they take off from Seattle and he jumps, let's say 7 minutes later in the exurbs of Seattle, whether it's near Tacoma or whether it's near Everett or maybe whether it's near Snoqualmie or whatever the case may happen to be, one way or the other, he's pretty close to his motel at the SeaTac airport. I mean, he's probably in for a 45-minute cab ride or something like that. So that also appears to make a lot of sense. It just kind of all adds up as far as that goes. And it's worth considering, it's worth remembering that DB Cooper didn't offer up a flight path. He said, listen, you guys just fly. You fly to Reno and there you go. They could have flown to Reno any way they wanted. So it just, in my mind, that makes a lot of sense there. So let me see what we've got going on here as far as questions. We got the Northwest Orient food menu. Maybe that's exactly what happened, and he aborted the first attempt and landed in Portland, or it landed in Portland. Oh, okay. Well, I think with Seth, what you're saying is that maybe he attempted to skyjack the jet maybe on the way down to Portland, if I'm reading you right. I don't know if that, I don't, that doesn't make any sense to me, because let's assume he started, like if I'm right about him flying into an airport or whatever, he kind of has to end his day where he starts his day. So again, if he starts his day in Seattle, he's got the motel room, jets down to Portland, and then flips around for the purpose of skyjacking the jet. One way or the other, he theoretically ends his day in Seattle. Either he aborts and ends his day in Seattle right where his motel room is, no sweat, no big deal, regroup, do it another day, or he's successful and jumps shortly after taking off, and he's, like I said, 30-minute cab ride or something like that to his motel room in Seattle. And again, it's important to understand that if he jumps successfully a few minutes after taking off, 7 or 8 minutes, in his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to be jumping 7 or 8 minutes after taking off. They're not even going to know that I actually jumped from the jet for the next 3 hours or whatever until it lands in Reno. So he's got a really big head start. So he can comfortably pick up the phone, call a taxi cab, dressed as DB Cooper. He could be dressed as DB Cooper, putting the parachutes aside, but I mean, he could basically look like DB Cooper as we understand him today, and no one's going to think twice about it, because they don't even know the guy's has jumped yet, and there certainly isn't any all points bulletin or anything out like that. So that's the first thing, is I think that's likely what happened, as far as is how he managed to get to the Portland airport. Now, as fate would have it, as luck would have it, things kind of went sideways for the guy when he started heading south. And let me see, Pat says Cooper had a lot of expenses then, multiple flights, cabs, motels, etc. Was someone funding the caper? Well, I mean, it's really not that expensive. I mean, the flight's $20 each way, motel room, I mean, geez, I don't know, 1971, I mean, probably inexpensive motels, probably $10 a night or something like that. So, I mean, I don't see him being in thousands of dollars or whatever. I mean, honestly, I just think the dude has a couple $100, and that pretty much takes care of everything he has to worry about. And a couple $100 in today's money, so maybe he has the equivalent of, I don't know, $1,000 or something like that. Maybe even not $1,000. So I think he could pretty easily do that. But now, as far as when the jet took off from Seattle, again, like I said, it's pretty clear in my mind, my understanding of the evidence, that his plan was to jump in the outskirts of Seattle. But there were a couple things that got in the way. First of all, he wanted the jet to take off with the air stairs down. The pilots essentially said, dude, we can't take off with the air stairs down, because we may crash, basically. And there was a little bit of back and forth between the pilots and Cooper, and ultimately Cooper relented. Now, my reading of the transcripts and so forth appears to suggest to me that once DB Cooper relented and said, okay, we'll go ahead and take off with the stairs up, he changed his mind, and he brought the subject up again a second time and said, you know what, I really want these air stairs down. And again, that started a whole conversation again, and ultimately Cooper said, all right, let's just take off with the air stairs up, but as soon as they're down, those things are going to be lowered, or rather, as soon as the jet takes off, those things are going to be lowered. Now, the problem is that obviously he had some problem getting the air stairs down. That delayed him by a handful of minutes, getting the air stairs down. Ultimately, the pilots had to level off at 7,000 feet. They had to pull back the throttle and slow down. And then finally, Cooper was able to get the air stairs to lower. And they weren't lowered all the way, they were just lowered a few feet. And then obviously, once that was done, they kind of flew level at 7,000 feet for a period of time. Then they went ahead and started climbing up to 10,000 feet. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that, I think there were some issues that he experienced with respect to that money bag, because he asked for the money in a knapsack. Obviously, he was planning on grabbing a knapsack and kind of flipping it around and wearing the knapsack or the backpack backwards, so it would be on his chest, and he'd have the parachute on his back. Well, the money didn't show up like that. It showed up basically in a cheap canvas, vault bag, really cheap canvas vault bag. That the integrity of that bag wasn't a hell of a lot more than like a brown grocery store paper bag. I mean, maybe a little bit more. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the larger point is that, you put 20 pounds worth of cash in that bag and you look at it and you're like, you know what, this is not going to hold up. I'm jumping out of the jet at 200 miles an hour and free falling for a period of time. Yeah, like this bag is just gonna like rip apart in midair, and that 200 grand is gonna be all over the place. So I think DB Cooper realized there was a problem. He had to improvise. I believe he improvised, and I believe that the way he improvised was by lightening the load basically in the bank bag. I believe he took some of the cash out of the bank bag and he put it into the dummy reserve parachute, one of the reserve parachutes, which happened to be the dummy reserve parachute. And I think he used that to house some of the cash. So I think he improvised. It seems sort of obvious to me that his plan was to jump with one of the mains, and that was it. He was going to have a knapsack on the front. He was going to jump with one of the mains, and that was it. I think his plan was to leave 3 of the parachutes behind. He may well have had in mind to cannibalize one of the parachutes, but either way, I think that's what his plan was. But as it worked out, because the money bag came the way it came, I think he improvised and he used one of the reserve parachutes to actually house the money. And I don't think he wore that on his front. I think our understanding from what the witnesses said is he kind of tied it. You cannibalized one of the parachutes, used quite a bit of shroud line to kind of tie up that money bag and everything. And then he kind of had it dangling by his waist, like by 6 feet or something like that, kind of like what you would see in the military there. See, Fred asks, if the chute weighs 45 pounds, how did Tina drag 160 pounds back to the plane? Well, he didn't do it all at once. The parachutes, I don't think were 45 pounds. I think the heaviest one, if my memory serves me right, was about 25 or 30 pounds. And then the smaller ones were like 20 pounds, 15 or 20 pounds. And the bag of cash was something like 20 pounds. And then he had the attache case, which I believe he jumped with. I don't believe he just chucked it out, but I believe he jumped with it. But either way, I think all told, when all that stuff is attached to his person, he's probably got, roughly 70 pounds worth of stuff to him, 60 pounds, 70 pounds, something in that neck of the woods. Plus he had the paper bag, which we really don't know what he had in that paper bag. So Sophie says, I believe he may have flown from Oakland, California, from the now decommissioned Army base. Well, I mean, and greetings, Joel. I'm not sure if what you mean, Sophie, is that he flew in from Oakland to Portland and then skyjacked a jet from Portland to Seattle. If that's what he did, if that's what you're suggesting what he did, what does he do then when he has to abort the plane and when he has to abort in Seattle? What does he do? He gets off the plane and just kind of wears the same clothes for a couple days? I mean, I guess that's possible, but it doesn't seem particularly well thought out. Moreover, if I'm right about him intending to jump in the outskirts of Seattle, what does he do then? Because he doesn't have a change of clothes or anything, because when he lands, he's dressed as DB Cooper. So, at some point you would think he would want to change his clothing, because obviously he's got a little bit of a head start, maybe a few hour head start over the authorities, but probably not much longer than that before they kind of get the description of DB Cooper out there. And it just seems to me that he would want to change his clothes, and again, so therefore, like, it just seems to me that he would want to have something staged up there in Seattle in advance, which kind of like helps him out regardless of what he does, regardless of what option he takes. Now, and let's talk a little bit about this too, just about sort of like trying to figure out what DB Cooper was doing, and how I've kind of arrived at some of the conclusions that I have as far as this goes. And this doesn't pertain exclusively to the first part of the flight. It pertains to other parts of the flight as well. One of the things that I always do as I asked myself, what would I do? I mean, if I were DB Cooper, if I were in his shoes, what would I do? And it's kind of like playing poker. If you're a professional poker player, everybody's familiar with poker tells and all this kind of stuff. But when you're playing poker, what really separates the really good players from the not so good players is the ability for good players to look at an opponent and try to piece together what their opponent is doing. In other words, the opponent may bet or may check or may raise or do certain things, and the really good player is going to have the ability to sort of look at what the opponent's doing and piece together what the opponent is thinking. And the reason why that's effective playing poker, and I think the same kind of rule applies here, is that generally speaking, how people respond in certain situations makes sense. Generally speaking, it has to add up, it has to make sense. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it, I understand that. Now, there are very basic things like, don't touch the flame. You touch the flame and it burns your hand, and that's very predictable. 100% of people are gonna, pull their hand away immediately after touching a flame. And it obviously gets more nuanced as things go on, but still, by and large, whether you're talking poker or I think even a crime like this, generally speaking, I think you can predict with a large degree of certainty how somebody would be expected to respond. So I try to do that oftentimes. How would I respond if I were in DB Cooper's shoes? What would I do differently? Or what would I do the same? What would I do? And I think that, at least as far as how I approach this, that sort of informs a lot of my thoughts and theories and so forth as far as that goes. So I believe that when we talk about like DB Cooper flying in from Seattle, and it kind of checks the boxes in terms of there were no taxi cab drivers that saw him arrive at the airport. There were no cars left behind at the Portland airport. Nobody really recalls him taking a bus or walking along the street to get to the airport. When you consider all that, and you consider all the variables, like he has to abort, and when he doesn't have any luggage, and his plan was to jump near Seattle, all these kind of things, like my theory about him starting his day in Seattle and intending on ending the day in Seattle sort of satisfies all the concerns or all the possible ramifications. The lone exception being kind of what happened, where he got delayed on takeoff and he ended up jumping, let's say 100, 150 miles from the Seattle area. So that's just kind of how I approach it, and I think that that's a pretty good way to approach these cases, this kind of stuff. See if I can keep the cigar going here. Now, in the last several days, the last few days, I've talked quite a bit about where DB Cooper actually landed. I've always had a very big problem with the fact that where the FBI believes he landed, nothing has been found. Absolutely zero has been found in that area. And where they believe he landed was essentially northeast of La Center, Washington. I'm not sure if that's Clark County up there, but it may be. That may be part of the northern reaches of Clark County, which is the same county that Vancouver, Washington is in. But it seems very, very problematic that, you've got hundreds of law enforcement and officials and people from the military, reserve looking for the guy. You've got hunters, you've got treasure hunters, you've got recreationists, you've got new neighborhoods that get built in the area. I mean, after 54 years, they haven't found lick, man. There's like absolutely nothing to indicate that the guy was ever there. And that's a problem. To me, that's a very big problem. And that's caused me to think, well, the flight path has got to be wrong. That doesn't make sense, especially when you consider where the money was found 8 years later, like kind of in the wrong area. It was found in an area where it shouldn't have been found. That all kind of just told me something's got to be up with that flight path. Something's just not right there. Well, obviously in the last several days, I finally heard from an air traffic controller. I won't go into all the details because some of you probably heard it already, but I communicated with an air traffic controller who was at McCord Air Force Base that night and observed and listened in as the plane was transitioning their airspace. And importantly, he said that he heard DB Cooper, or rather one of the pilots say, DB Cooper just jumped. And when that happened, when they heard that, they have what's called a grease pencil, and they circled it on their radar scope or their radar screen where DB Cooper jumped. And the problem, and it's not a small problem, it's a very big problem, is that that was near Chehalis, Washington, which is like a long ways north of the FBI's drop zone. I mean, 60, 70 miles, something like that. I mean, it's a good ways north. I'd have to figure it out exactly. That's a very big problem. But the thing is that I think when you consider that what he said, what this air traffic controller said, again, his name is Bruce, and you factor in what the other air traffic controller who took over Flight 305, basically immediately, before DB Cooper jumped, but before, let me just clarify this. There was a second air traffic controller who took over control of Flight 305 before DB Cooper jumped, about 13 minutes or so before DB Cooper jumped. The problem is there was a screw up with the communication between the pilots and air traffic control. So it's just dead space for 14 minutes. So we don't have any transcripts or anything that relate to that 14 minutes of time. Finally, communication was established between the flight crew and the air traffic controller. But the problem is that communication was established apparently a couple of minutes after DB Cooper had jumped. So, a little rough here trying to keep this thing lit. So the problem is that even though the pilot himself, Bill Radicek, had mentioned that, he mentioned it to me personally, but he's also mentioned it, I think, publicly, that when DB Cooper jumped, he announced that DB Cooper jumped. We've got nothing in the transcripts that could validate that could corroborate that statement. So this air traffic controller coming out of the woodwork at McCord saying, hey, I heard the pilot say DB Cooper jumped. Well, that appeared to corroborate that. The problem, again, of course, is that it's in the wrong spot, theoretically. So ultimately, I think what that tells us, and again, there's a lot of generations and a lot of thought and a lot of stuff that's gone on over the last couple of weeks related to this, but I think that what that tells us is that when the pilots originally announced, when this air traffic controller heard the pilots announce the DB Cooper jump, they were wrong. Because there were two events. There were two events that happened as the plane was flying south out of Seattle approaching Portland. There was one that happened approximately a little bit before 8 p.m. where there's some turbulence, and they kind of thought that he may have jumped, and they tried to reach him on the interphone, on the intercom, and Cooper didn't respond immediately. But eventually Cooper got on and said, yo, I'm here. So obviously they realized DB Cooper hadn't jumped. I believe that the air traffic controller, when he heard the pilot say DB Cooper jumped, I believe it pertains to this event that occurred a little bit before 8 p.m. Now, as to whether or not the pilot announced a second time that DB Cooper jumped when the plane was further south and the McCord Air Force air traffic controllers were no longer listening because it was out of their range of the McCord area, that's a mystery. I don't know if the pilot mentioned a second time or didn't mention a second time. But why all of this is important is because as I've talked to the two air traffic controllers, and they have very clear recollections of when certain things happened and that type of thing, they're actually consistent in terms of like when the handoff was made and everything else. And it appears to suggest that the timing, the little time marks that are on this very famous yellow map, which is the flight path map that the Air Force put together, it appears that the time marks next to these radar plots is incorrect. I think they're off by several minutes. Several meaning, 5-6 minutes, something like that. Now, it's important to note that the Air Force put together the plots and put together the map. They did not put the timestamps or write the times that associate with the plots on the yellow map. Somebody else did that, and I believe that was somebody with the FBI. So the net effect of all of this is that the flight path may well be perfectly accurate. It may be perfectly accurate, I don't know. It does, however, appear that in terms of the timestamps, those are completely wrong. And one thing I mentioned at the live that I did a week ago or so is that we're actually dealing with 3 sets of time. We've got the times that are mentioned on the yellow map, the FBI flight path yellow map, which I think are off by 5 or 6 minutes or so. Then we've got transcripts that relate from the airliner to Northwest Orient flight ops. Those timestamps are off by a couple of minutes. We can hear the communication between flight ops and the pilots, even during that 14-minute blackout period that I referenced a few minutes ago. There are timestamps on there, but those are off by a couple of minutes, not because of anything nefarious. It's just that the system, what's called the AirInc system, has a delay like that. It takes a couple of minutes for it actually to come out on the teletype. So that's understood, everybody gets that. Then the third sequence of timing we had relates to the actual transcripts related to the pilots talking with air traffic control. That communication is precise. Those are precise. So again, to repeat one of the things that I said a week ago or what have you, is that oftentimes when we're trying to figure out where he jumped and where the pilot did this, that, or the other thing, where turns took place or whatever, we may be all using the same yellow map, the same flight path, but the times that we use, we may be pulling times from the yellow map, we may be pulling times from Seattle Air Traffic Control transcripts, we may be pulling times from the Northwest Flight Ops communication, and those are not all synced together, and that can lead to an awful lot of confusion. And I think that that's what happened here, and I think ultimately what that tells us is that DB Cooper didn't jump where the authority jumped. I actually believe he jumped north of where they believed he jumped. I believe he Pigeon Springs, Washington, which I think is somewhere in the area of about 12 miles north, 12 to 15 miles north. So I hear that I got a glitch in the system and it's kind of warping out there. So hopefully you can hear and it's not messing up too bad as far as the audio goes. Got to keep this thing lit here. I got to be working on more often. So I think that explains why nothing has been found, because I think he just jumped north of where they believe he jumped, and it's an area that was never searched before. It's an area that has never been searched. They got close. They got reasonably close when they were searched around, like near Ariel, Washington, and that area there, but they were still, a handful of miles south of where I believe he actually jumped. So I think that's part of the problem. Now, as far as the money ending up on Tina Bar, that's a big problem no matter how you slice it. That's a really, really big problem how you slice it. So here's Fred asking, how did the money get to Tina Bar from Pigeon Springs? Boy, that's a $64,000 question right there. And there's seat 18E saying, what are your thoughts on the military parachute that was seen on the railroad bridge in the Columbia right after the jump? So I'll answer both of those questions. So as far as how the money ends up on Tina Bar, I think there's only one really possible way that it could end up on Tina Bar from Pigeon Springs, and that is it was transported there, probably by car. DB Cooper probably drove it there by car. Maybe he rented a boat, or not rented a boat, but took a boat somehow and got down there. Maybe, but there's no natural way for the money to arrive there via the Columbia River. So I don't see how that money arrived there by any other possible means than by a human being, by human intervention, and that it was buried by a human being with human intervention. And I've said before, if a human being buried DB Cooper's money, my money is on that human being DB Cooper himself. So what that tells us is that DB Cooper it's all but certain that DB Cooper survived and evacuated the area. Now, why he would do that, why he would opt to bury the money on Tina Bar for a period of time, whatever, that's ripe for speculation. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I guess I could rationalize it and say, yeah, the guy lived back east and he wanted to catch a plane back east and he just didn't want to run the risk of carrying, the $200,000 of cash in his luggage in case they're like randomly searching bags or something like that. And he didn't want to be caught red-handed with it. So I think maybe he just buried it. The idea being that he'll come back at a later date when things have kind of cooled down and recover the money. That's kind of about the only thing that I can come up with, but that does appear to be what happened. I can't come up with any other explanation for how the money ends up at Tina Bar. Now, as far as the parachute that was apparently found on, I believe, the I-5 bridge or what have you, crossing over the Columbia River, I think Seed 18E asked that. I sort of call bullshit on a lot of this stuff. In this case, there's always, people always profess to see things and people and heard things or what have you. And like, it's frustrating how there's just never anything to back it up. I mean, there's stories of kids finding a couple weeks earlier some of the money on the beach of Tina Bar. Well, where the fuck is it? I mean, conveniently, they don't have it. The parachute on the bridge, where the fuck is it? Complete conveniently, nobody has it. It's just that kind of stuff, just like, I don't know. I mean, I don't put a lot of credence in that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying that these are all guys or people that are like trying to pull a fast one or whatever. Maybe they saw something and, a piece of, cloth or something. I mean, hell, we found a damn sheet from Kmart out there looking near Tina Bar a couple of years ago. So maybe it was something like that. I mean, random shit ends up around there. So maybe they saw it there and maybe they thought it was a parachute because, hey, we heard that DB Cooper jumped and it's probably the parachute and maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But I highly, highly doubt it was the actual parachute, DB Cooper's actual parachute. Uncle Jim 2, OMG, the cigar and wine. Well, I got the cigar, but not the wine. I'm rolling with water tonight. So the money was placed and right before the retirement. Well, that is one of the odd things, is that the money was found on Tina Bar exactly 3,000 days to the day after the skyjacking, precisely 3,000 days. And it was immediately after Ralph Himmelsbach, the public face of the investigation in Portland, FBI agent in Portland, before he retired. So it's a little bit kind of odd, and that's kind of just bizarre enough where I'm like, I just think it was coincidence, because it just doesn't really make any sense, especially all these years later, given what we know about the money, the diatoms, and just the condition of the money and everything else. It's like, it kind of doesn't, like, for somebody to try to sell us on a story that they had these rotted packets hanging around and then decided to just bury them on the beach because they somehow knew immediately after Himmelsbach retired that some 8-year-old kid was going to find it on Tina Bar, that doesn't pass the smell test. So what I'm getting at is I just think it's coincidence. I just think it's coincidence that that's how the money ended up there, or the timing of the money find. I think is coincidental, related to Ralph Himmelsbach's retirement. So, by the way, feel free to ask any questions or continue, opine or whatever if you have anything you want to bring up as far as this goes. Hopefully that's bright enough out here. Obviously it's dark behind me. I've got this ring light set up here, but it looks a little dim, but actually it looks all right on the computer, so maybe it's all right. But so that gets us to the jet landing in Reno, and obviously the authorities realizing that our man is gone, and they had a pretty good idea that he jumped near the Vancouver area, a little north of Vancouver, and I think that that's right. I again, as I've mentioned before, that when the pilots kind of heard that or felt that pressure bump, the second event, the pressure bump. I think that seems to be pretty solid because they like flew the jet out over the ocean. They sort of tested the theory by sliding a 230-pound sled off of the back of the jet a couple times to see how the air stairs would respond. Would it create the bouncing of the instruments and create that sort of popping sensation? And it apparently confirmed that that's exactly how the jet responded. So that appears to be pretty solid. So I think it's pretty safe to say that yeah, DB Cooper jumped north of Vancouver. Now I know there's been a lot of speculation. In fact, on the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook, there's talk about, a lot of people seem to think he landed near, I think, Orchards or Battlegrounds, something like that. I mean, the problem with that is that would actually be south. He would have had to have jumped south, further south than the authorities originally believed. And that just doesn't really mesh with our understanding, or at least my understanding of the timing as sort of penciled out by the two air traffic controllers, neither of whom was ever interviewed by the FBI, by the way. They were never interviewed by law enforcement. So I think that's a real big oversight on the part of the FBI. But I mean, if you take what they said seriously in terms of their recollections of when things happened or whatever, I can't reconcile that time gap. I can't foresee a situation, as I understand the evidence today, I cannot see a situation of DB Cooper actually jumping further south than Le Center. Rather, I think the evidence is clear that he jumped further north. Moreover, if you're talking Battleground, you're talking, some of those areas down there that have been mentioned, Orchards area, there's a lot of freaking people that live in that area. There's a lot of people that live in that area. There's a lot of people that recreate there's a lot of people in that area. And again, where's the shit? Where's the parachute? Where's all this stuff that he jumped with? Now, I guess it's possible that he evacuated the area with all of that stuff, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Especially the parachute, it doesn't make any sense to me because he didn't seem to be too concerned about leaving behind the two parachutes on the jet that he left behind. He didn't chuck those out the back, he left them on the jet. So what's so special about the two that he left with? Why do those parachutes warrant being secreted away from the landing zone? I mean, because let's face it, I mean, if the authorities find the parachutes like a few months later, who gives a shit? Like, what does that tell us? So they find, the two parachutes in Orchards. I mean, why does DB Cooper really have to be concerned about anything? At that point, he's like long gone. He's bolted. He's rolled. So again, it doesn't make any sense that he would have bothered leaving the area with those parachutes. I think he would have discarded them somewhere, threw them under a log, threw them in sticker bushes, something of that nature, and just rolled because they're cumbersome, they're heavy. They're evidence. If somebody sees a dude walking with a couple parachutes, that's going to be kind of hard to explain. So, like, it just seems to me like there's no way in hell he would have done that. He would have taken those parachutes. Let me try to relight this here. So much for cigars, huh? I thought this would be kind of a nice addition tonight to smoke this cigar out here and talk about this stuff, but it's actually creating more of a problem than it's worth. Maybe I'm doing too much talking here and need to do more listening or something. I don't know. But so as far as the what was recovered in Reno, I think the really really big and really important piece of evidence was the tie. DB Cooper's skinny black clip-on tie cost $1.49 brand new from JCPenney, Towncraft number 3. That in later years has, I think, served as a treasure trove of physical evidence. Now, back in 1971, it was of little value. But as you fast forward 50 years, it becomes a pretty big freaking deal here. So I think that that's that's a very important piece. Let me read this comment here from, does that say Owl Cowl? Is there any credence at all to the report that 3 of the ransom bills were identified in retail transactions in Vancouver, Washington in the months after Nordjack? I've never heard of anything like that. So I'll say no. So yeah, no. So to the best of our knowledge, none of the money has ever been discovered outside of the $6,000 that was found on Tina Barr 8 years later. So, and again, if it has, where's the bills? Now, I should say that within the last year, there was a bill that I think, oh, what the hell? I'm gonna think about this. I almost think that there was a bill that, yeah, there was a bill that showed, okay, well, that was part of the original 6,000, but there was a bill that showed up that I believe was part of the insurance company's lot, because when the money was found, obviously the FBI said, yo, we're gonna take the money, and they confiscated the money from the Ingrams. Eventually, Richard Tusaw, who was a former FBI agent, but also an attorney, represented the Ingrams, and they sued the FBI to get the money back. And a deal was worked out with the FBI, and this was several years later, whereby the FBI got 14 bills. They got first dibs. They chose 14 bills, the best bills. And then the rest of the bills were split evenly between the Ingram family and the insurance company. Now, the insurance company eventually went out of business. I think they were headquartered in North Carolina. I actually spoke with the attorney for the insurance company, the guy who was the attorney at that point, about this. And he said that, and he was based in Portland, and he said that, you know, at the time that the insurance company kind of went out of business, closed up shop, all the files and everything in Portland were sent to, I believe it was North Carolina, and they were there for a period of time, and Lord knows what happened to all that stuff there. I believe eventually it was all destroyed. So I think that, unfortunately, the insurance company's portion of the bills, I believe that virtually all of them were destroyed when all the files, presumably, and everything were destroyed after 7 years or whatever the time frame is by the insurance company. I think somebody just chucked it in a shredder or burner and just destroyed it. Now, it appears that a few of those bills may have gotten out, maybe as souvenirs or what have you, executives or top salespeople or whatever, I don't know. But that's a really kind of sad ending to a lot of those bills. So there's actually a lot fewer bills than we think that are out there. Finding D.B. Cooper, not all. One made it to an employee as a retirement gift. Yes, which is what I was just talking about, Nikki. That's right. There's the one bill that came from the insurance company, and that's the only one that we're aware of. But that was a hell of a find. That was pretty cool. But again, that was part of the original $6,000 that was found on Tina Barr there. Now, as far as the tie is concerned, Tom Kay has done a lot of really good work with respect to the tie and having it analyzed by Macron Labs and trying to come up with particles and things of that nature and see what we've learned. I'm not going to go and get into a big diatribe or dissertation about everything related to the tie particles or whatever, but there are particles of a titanium and antimony alloy that I discovered that was sort of buried in the data a handful of years ago, which I believe point to a company called Remcrew Titanium that eventually became known as Crucible Steel. They are no longer in business, but they are a major supplier, I think probably the major supplier of specialty metals to Boeing aircraft during the 60s. And again, they were located in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. So it seems to me, again, based upon my understanding of the evidence, it seems to me that D.B. Cooper came from that world. It seems to me that he came from that company, from Crucible Steel. And that's based upon, again, the particles on the tie, specifically the titanium and antimony, plus obviously the relationship between Boeing and Crucible Steel helps, because D.B. Cooper did appear to have, I would just say, better than average knowledge of the Boeing 727. In fact, I would say kind of advanced knowledge of the Boeing 727, the type of plane that he skyjacked. So let me look at this. So we've got Gotilles, is that right? Let me put my reading glasses on here. Gotilles, did he cut a lot of cord from one of the parachutes? If so, for what I've heard you need rope to get out of a tree if you land in one. Yeah, actually, it was something close to 100 feet. 90 to 100 feet of shroud line is missing. Now, there's been some question as was some of it sort of taken by FBI agents as a souvenir? Did he actually cannibalize 90 feet or whatever? There's been some speculation about that. We don't know. But the money, we know what the shroud line was used for because the flight attendant actually saw him use the shroud line to secure that bank bag, like tie off the top and kind of run shroud line up and down the bottom of it, and then kind of create a handle and a essentially a rope to tie around his waist and have the bag of money attached to him. So that appears to be what that certainly appears to be what the majority of that was used for. As far as getting out of a tree, you're absolutely right. We know D.B. Cooper had a pocket knife, like a Swiss Army knife or something like that. And if D.B. Cooper was an experienced like smoke jumper, for example, and landed in a tree, let's say he landed 50 feet up or what have you, he would have known, if he were a smoke jumper, he would have known, and perhaps even maybe a military person or something of that nature, he would have known how to essentially start cannibalizing the shroud line from his parachute and use it to rappel down from the tree that he was stuck in. So that is a possibility. There is, however, one very big problem with that theory, that D.B. Cooper did that or what have you. The parachute would have still been stuck in the tree. Like, unless he somehow pulled down and yanked the parachute, the canopy and everything down from the tree, which I would imagine would be really, really difficult. Unless he could do that, the parachute would have still be up there. And you would have thought somebody would have said, yo, up 50 feet in the tree canopy, there's a white parachute. And that's, again, 54 years later, nothing like that has ever been found. So it does appear that D.B. Cooper landed safely. There's plenty of farmland in that area or clear-cut areas, and it does appear that that's what happened there, and they didn't have to do that. Ron asks, the tie is insane. Tons of particles made of all sorts of weird compounds. Not only the titanium particles, but also the odd minerals, unusual sands, etc. The tie is insane. And, for a long time, I believed that D.B. Cooper was an engineer from Crucible Steel, probably a titanium metallurgist engineer. And this is where Vince Peterson comes into the conversation, a guy that I said publicly, I believe he's either D.B. Cooper or he was very close to D.B. Cooper. He was either D.B. Cooper or he knew D.B. Cooper, like in passing. Well, I think now, I think it's the latter. I think he knew D.B. Cooper in passing. I do not believe Vince Peterson was D.B. Cooper. And the reason why is because when you look at just the sheer magnitude of particles on the tie, and we've got some very clear photographs of a lot of these particles, one of which is like a titanium particle with stainless steel smeared into it. So obviously there's some compressive force involved with creating that particular particle. One is a finely coiled piece of aluminum, and then we've got some other, appears to be like bars of titanium, like powder metallurgical titanium, powder metallurgical stuff. Those things are consistent with, I think, somebody from the machine shop, not an actual engineer, not a titanium engineer, but rather I think somebody in the machine shop. And so when we're talking about D.B. Cooper, who D.B. Cooper was, I firmly believe, because his tie is coated with it, there's a lot of this stuff on a tie. It's not just a couple spots, but it's coated with it, and it all appears to be touch transfer, stuff he got from his fingers and just touched his tie, taking it off, putting it on, all that kind of stuff. My money is on D.B. Cooper working at Crucible Steel, probably as the shop foreman. So he was the foreman of the shop. He's wearing the ties, taking it off. He's kind of the middleman between the guys who are doing a lot of work on the shop floor and the engineers who are dreaming up things and tests and all that other kind of stuff. So I believe that he's likely the shop foreman. That would explain just the sheer abundance of particles and the array of particles on the tie. It explains the tie itself because DB Cooper obviously wore a tie, like at work. Assuming that's DB Cooper's tie, and there's no reason to believe it wasn't DB Cooper's tie, by definition, he had to have a job where he was wearing a tie. And not too many guys, in fact, I would say pretty much zero guys that were kind of literally on the shop floor doing the, the heavy duty work were wearing ties, because obviously it's unsafe and it's completely unnecessary. So my money's on DB Cooper being a shop foreman there at Crucible Steel. Let's see, Steve Spade wondering if there are any boots on the ground missions planned for the future. You're speaking to the right guy, brother. Yeah, there are. For my purposes, I am not going to be searching around Tina Bar anymore looking for a parachute or anything of that nature, because my theory has evolved. It's changed with this new evidence that I believe has been come to light in the last couple of weeks, and I'm more interested in the Pigeon Springs area. Now, unfortunately, that's a big area, and it's hard to be really, really precise where DB Cooper could have landed, but I think that that's a much better guesstimate of where he landed than around the Tina Bar area. And I think this brings up an important thing as well that happens a lot in the case. There's a lot of, I'm going to call it inertia. I've talked about this before. It's inertia in the case. And here's what I mean by inertia. You have people that get married to a suspect or get married to a theory, and they just will not give it up no matter what the hell changes or what the hell happens or the new evidence that comes online or whatever the case may happen to be. And I am not that way. That's not how I roll. My investigation here, you're going to hear me on occasion backtrack, change my mind about theories, persons of interest, whatever the case may happen to be. And the reason why is because my investigation, you're following it in real time. I mean, if I'm not doing this, like if I'm literally sitting back and waiting for, I guess the evidence to be like locked in, and then I go out there and I talked about my theories and persons of interest, well, what the fuck does that do? At that point, basically the case is already solved, right? Like the only time you could really comfortably do that is when they actually solve the case and it's done, it's closed, it's over with. That's not who I am. I mean, again, this is an investigation unfolding in real time here, and as far as I know, I'm kind of like the only guy doing this. I mean, obviously you got Tom K testing out particles and stuff on the tie, and you got others and that kind of thing. But I don't know that anybody's really sort of like kind of doing what I'm doing, looking at the tie particles, looking at the boots on the ground stuff, interviewing witnesses, and then coming up with theories and throwing stuff out there and just kind of letting it, and let's just see where it goes. So that's, so I wear it as a badge of honor, honestly. Some people like to take shots and say, hey, Eric, was changing his mind or whatever the deal is, which is not right. That's an inaccurate statement to begin with. But again, it's a badge of honor because at the end of the day, I'm interested in figuring out who the real DB Cooper is. And if we were serious, or if somebody's serious about figuring out who the real DB Cooper is, you got to be intellectually honest about it, man. I mean, things are going to evolve, things are going to change, and you have to modify your theories accordingly. Otherwise, you're just a homer, man. You're just a homer. You're just stuck in the mud. You're not changing a damn thing. And honestly, you just end up looking like a fool and an idiot when all's said and done, in my opinion. Having said that, I mean, you do you. I mean, people are free to approach it any way they want to, and that's fair enough. I have no issue with that. So, let's see here. Got amen from Pat Boland. Feel free to ask more questions, what have you. It's 7:59, so I've been on for just under an hour here. But so in terms of like the totality of my theory or whatever theories with respect to this, that's kind of where it is now. I mean, in terms of just basically what I think has happened and where we are today. I do believe we're going to eventually figure out who this guy was. And the reason why I say that is because we've got the tie, we've got the particles. We do have, witnesses, firsthand witnesses, like the air traffic controller I talked about, who, hasn't ever talked publicly before about this, never communicated his recollections to the authorities, to the FBI specifically. And slowly but surely, this kind of stuff is coming out. And all that information, I think, is really, helping us kind of lean into it and ultimately figure out who this guy was and what happened. So I feel very, very comfortable that we're getting very close to figuring this guy out. Again, I think he happened to come from Crucible Steel, the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, for the reasons I talked about earlier. And I'm drilling down and trying to see what I can come up with in terms of people who check the box, shop foreman, that type of thing. It's a tough proposition this many years out, obviously 54 years out, because employee records are long gone, and hell, the company's not even around anymore. So it's a tough proposition, but having said all that, I think in the end, science and technology and frankly just sheer gumption and resilience are going to win out, because that's what's going to take. And honestly, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun, I think, to kind of dig into this and see what we come up with. So Nikki says technology, and as the vortex keeps turning, it will catch up to him one day. I believe that. I do believe that. Now, again, are we ever going to come up with DNA level stuff? I don't know. Who knows if that'll be the case, but we'll see. Maybe we do, which actually kind of brings up another point, and that's related to like the FBI files, which every 6 weeks or so there's 400 or 500 pages. There's a new tranche that comes out, new files and that kind of stuff, which honestly I have been underwhelmed for a while with the stuff that's come out. But the one thing that would really help more than the evidence is the flipping evidence, or more than the files rather, is the evidence, is that darn tie. That would be really helpful. Maybe even get our hands on one of those other bills that the FBI has and see if we can get Tom K to analyze one of those other bills the same way he analyzed Mark Meltzer's bill, the one that the diatoms and everything were discovered on. It would be nice to actually take a look at that and see what we could come up with. So, who knows? Maybe eventually somebody in the federal government that is in a position of authority will say, you know what, let's hand some of this evidence over to some experts, and let's see, scientists, that kind of thing, and let's see what we come up with. I mean, I'm hopeful that happens, and I think if that were to happen, we may be able to solve this thing like in a snap, because I believe that it's entirely possible that as part of the tie, the clip-on tie, there's this little spindle that I've talked about before. I think it's entirely possible that we actually have an uncontaminated profile of D.B. Cooper in this spindle that's currently in the closed position on the tie. We'll never know unless we actually get our hands on the tie, open the spindle, and swab it and see what we come up with. But it sure would be nice to actually do that. But up to this point, the FBI hasn't been willing to play ball. I'm not really sure what the reason for that is, but who knows? I mean, that's it. Jay Weiss, what about no pull? Any chance he used the dummy he took? The problem with the no pull is, how'd the money get on Tina Barr? I mean, if it's a no pull, he would have had to literally like crash landed on Tina Barr right where the money was found. Like there's no, again, the problem with the Tina Barr money is that there are no river systems or stream systems that naturally get the money, those 3 packets, to Tina Barr. And it's a lot more complicated than that, because the money was found high enough on the beach where the river had only flooded 2 times from the date of the skyjacking to when the money was found. Once in the summer of 72, 7 months after the skyjacking, and once in the summer of 74, where the money got high enough to actually reach that spot. So by definition, if somebody's going to argue that the money was delivered by the river, it had to have occurred during one of those periods of time when the river flooded and could actually deliver the money to the spot where the money was found. But I think that that's like hokey and fantasy. I just think that's impossible. You've got three packets of $20 bills. They're basically right on top of each other underneath the sand. I mean, it by all accounts, like those three packets had kind of been sitting there since day one, or day two, something of that nature. So I just I just think it's impossible, virtually impossible. I'm talking quadrillion to one odds that somehow these packets randomly floated and all ended up in the same spot or whatever. Even if it was all in the same money bag and somehow the rest of the money bag got swept away, but these three somehow got buried in the sand for 8 years. It doesn't make sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense, then it probably didn't happen. So, Al Cal, isn't it rather rigid to be married to REM crew as the only possible source of the tie particles? Fair question. I'm not married to REM crew. I'm not married to Crucible Steel. My understanding of the evidence right now and the relationship between Crucible and Boeing and a lot of other things, the powder titanium metallurgy, there's a number of different things appear to point very strongly at Crucible Steel. Again, there's a lot of stuff I'm not discussing here, but there's several metrics that you can apply that appear to point to this one company. That said, you gotta always be willing to keep an open mind if something else comes along that appears to throw a wrench in the works. So I'm not married to it, but we're at least engaged as far as that goes. So it'd be really, really hard for me to understand how all of these different things come from some other company. But who knows? I haven't found DB Cooper yet, so maybe I'm wrong. So let's see here. Pat says, I'm wondering if with the latest DNA technology, those partial samples should be revisited. Those partial samples. Well, the problem with any kind of DNA profile procured off the front of the tie is obvious that, the tie's been touched a lot, handled around a lot, all kinds of contamination, DNA contamination, and my understanding is we're just simply not there in terms of being able to sort of splice out, let's say 100 different DNA profiles, partial profiles and everything. So I maybe one day, I don't know, but that's why I think our best chance is to get access to the tie and try to open that spindle and see if by chance we have a clean DNA profile for DB Cooper. And I think we got a pretty good shot of that being the case. But we need the damn tie to do it. The FBI is not playing ball, and it doesn't seem like they have any interest in testing it either. So, go Tillies. Often criminals get picked up or arrested for something else not related to the original crime. Any way to find out if the cops picked up anyone the night at the area that looked like DB Cooper? A lot of that stuff has been looked into. So they thought about these things, and the FBI, for some of the mistakes and errors they did an awful lot of things right as well. And they were very, very thorough in a lot of ways. So I don't want to come across like I'm totally dumping on the FBI, because they did a lot of really good work. But some mistakes were made. But, this was an innovative crime, and they hadn't really experienced anything like this before. And obviously, if you're heading off to uncharted territory, boy, that's sort of a recipe for mistakes to be made, errors to be made, assumptions to be made that are incorrect, all the rest. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Ron said, were the three packets of money found on Tina Bar all banded together? That would help explain how they ended up buried together. That's a good question, Ron. We've discussed that a lot. And hold on a second here. Let me get this thing going here. The short answer is we don't really know. I mean, there's nothing in the files that talk about the packets being banded together like in bricks or anything like that. But it's possible, and that could explain those three packets being together if there's one rubber band that like held the three together. I think the jury's kind of still out on that. I tend to think that it wasn't like that, but I don't know. I don't know for sure, but that is a possibility. But it still doesn't change the fact that even if you have a brick of those three packets together, boy, that's a really, really hard thing to figure out. I mean, obviously they broke and separated at some point, and Brian Ingram talks about finding the money on Tina Bar, and they said there were three distinct clumps, three distinct packets. So at least at the time that they were found, they were separate. So that all that kind of tends to tell me that they were three separate packets and probably not bound together. But it is possible that they were. But I don't know that it really changes much as far as our theory is concerned with that. Pat said that Brian told me the packets were somewhat askew but on top of each other. Yes, I believe that is correct, and that makes perfect sense. If the packets are askew but on top of each other, that I can't, like, again, because I believe that what he did is I believe he buried the bank bag. He buried the bank bag all cinched up and tightened up with some of the money in there. And then I believe that he put loose packets into the dummy reserve parachute for the reasons I talked about earlier. And I believe that he threw the loose packets in the hole with the canvas bank bag, because leaving the loose packets in the dummy reserve parachute would have necessitated digging a hole probably like triple the size, which is too cumbersome. So I think when D.B. Cooper landed, wherever he landed, I think he ditched the parachutes. He obviously took the loose packets out of the dummy reserve and put them in his coat pocket or something like that. Went to Tina Bar, and again, why, what the reason for it or whatever, that's a big mystery. But it just appears to me that he threw the white bank bag in the hole, and he threw the loose packets in the hole, covered it all up. I tested this out, like I did it like in 90 seconds a couple of years ago, so it's very easy to do just using my hands and on the beach there. And I believe he just came back months later and retrieved it under cover of darkness, and the three packets were just overlooked. But those three packets were probably, if they were, let's say, 3 inches to the left in the hole, and DB Cooper trying to pull everything out of the hole and just didn't carve far enough to the left, for example, boy, that would explain why you got three packets that are kind of just like all stacked right next to each other 3 inches to the left, and ultimately found by Brian Ingram. So I think that's the reason for it. See, Nikki said there were some cows that got loose right over the money find spot shortly before Brian found them that might have disturbed the bundle. I actually don't know anything about that, Nikki. I've never heard anything of cows getting loose over the money find spot. I don't recall anybody ever saying that they found cow crap anywhere on the beach. I mean, I guess that'd be worth asking the Fazios about. Obviously, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, but I'm unfamiliar with that. But even that, I mean, like dogs kind of like dig into sand and all that kind of stuff. I don't know about cows. I mean, and if a dog had like been digging at it, like let's say somebody had their dog there and they were digging at it, you would have thought that the dog would have pulled it up and put it in his mouth and ran away with it or something. That's just the way dogs are. So I don't know. Let's get more of the cigar going here. Fred, if he came back for the money, maybe he took the chutes and briefcase. Well, here's the problem with that, Fred. Again, this is just me and my diseased mind thinking about it. What would I do? That means he would have had to dig a hole big enough to bury the parachutes with the money. and them parachutes were big. You got a big ass hole you're trying to dig for. A more sense to me that he stashes the parachutes near where he landed, and then separate from that spot, which may be uncovered at some point, with bloodhounds smelling out parachutes or whatever they're doing. Separate from that point, I think he makes his way to Tina Bar and separately buries the money by itself. So I don't think that they would have been all been buried in the same spot. And as far as like DB Cooper retrieving the money and then driving 30 miles to also get the parachutes, that doesn't make sense either, because I mean, why not leave well enough alone? I mean, what happens if, I mean, why does he take, I mean, again, why take the parachutes? I mean, why not just leave well enough alone? And as I said earlier, he apparently didn't have a problem leaving 2 of the parachutes behind on the jets for the authorities to recover. What the hell's so special about the other 2 that he jumped with? I mean, they all came from the same locations, so you know, he didn't own them. So I just don't see why he would really bother with them any more than he needed to. I mean, the one parachute delivered him to the ground alive. The other parachute was used to house the money. That was their only job description that night. And once they fulfilled their obligations to DB Cooper, whoever this guy was, I think he just discarded them and rolled. Kept the important stuff, the money, kept the important stuff with him. And as far as the attaché case, which I believe he also kept, I don't just chucked it out, but he could have. He could have just chucked it out, but I don't believe he did that. It seems to me he would have probably taken that as well, probably with the money. See at 18E, Cooper jumped anywhere. If Cooper jumped anywhere near Pigeon Springs, why not bury the money near the DZ, not miles away? I don't know. I really don't know, unless there were 2 things that happened here, and this is what I tend to believe happened. I tend to believe that he landed near Pigeon Springs, and he basically did what Richard Floyd McCoy did, which was stash the parachutes and the money. And then I'm assuming he made his way back to Seattle. He probably had a rental car there and a motel there, again, my theory, and then immediately turned back around and retrieved the money and left the parachutes. Then once he had the money retrieved, he drove to Tina Bar and buried the money there on Tina Bar, separate from where the parachutes were found. Now, maybe the reason he did that is because he thought, you know, maybe the authorities have somewhat of an idea where I jumped. And they did, indeed, they did have somewhat of an idea where he jumped. And he's afraid that if I leave that money sitting there for several months, that eventually it'll be found along with the parachutes. But by separating the money from the parachutes and putting the money in a completely different area, they'll never find it. The authorities will never find it. And I think that's probably the most likely explanation for how things worked out the way they did. Jay says the briefcase is out there. I believe you're right about that. Well, let me rephrase that. I believe he jumped with the briefcase. If I were to bet money on it, I would say he took the briefcase with him. And the reason why I believe he would have taken the briefcase with him is because it was described as cheap but new. Cheap but new. So I just think that there's just too much evidence in that with the fake bomb and the briefcase and everything. I think there's just that's too much evidence to leave behind, because presumably he bought that, you know, from Sears or some such place, and that's very different than the parachutes, which he didn't own. I mean, they were delivered by the authorities. So if they found the briefcase, there may be a way to sort of like reverse engineer where the suitcase came from. Maybe the model 3600 came from the Sears and, you know, Indianapolis, Indiana, and there you go. Then it starts unraveling real quick for the guy. I don't know. It may have also been used to house some of the money. Maybe on the night that he jumped, he didn't bury all of the money. Maybe he took, you know, $5,000. I don't know. I mean, you know, we can kind of speculate, but there's a number of reasons why I think taking the parachute makes sense. Or I'm sorry, taking the briefcase, the attaché case makes sense. Ron says by now the chute's briefcase, bomb, and most of the other stuff that Cooper had would have decomposed beyond recognition. I don't believe that's the case. Um, and the reason why is because just with the stuff that I've done up around Tina Bar and stuff, I mean, we've found a lot of cans and crap like that that are clearly from the same time frame. In fact, this last search of Tina Bar, I mean, we found, beer cans with the old-fashioned pull tab, which is from, no later than the early 80s, and the cans, like those things look like they're going to be around there for quite a while there. But importantly, when we're talking the parachute has steel components there that they're going to be around for, a long, long time, 5, 10,000, 15,000 years. That steel's not going anywhere, the components that make up the parachute. So that stuff would still be there. If he happened to leave the briefcase behind, I'm sure there are plastics and screws and hinges and stuff like that made from steel as well that would also be there. 54 years is not, 5,000 years. I mean, it's 54 years. It's not that big of a deal. And the other thing is that the one thing that really attacks stuff and degrades stuff, evidence, is UV radiation. It's sunlight. So obviously there's not like a hell of a lot of sunlight around the Pacific Northwest, certainly not like Arizona. And assuming he stashed it under sticker bushes, under a log or something like that, that's even better protected still. Not to mention just the natural canopy of the trees and everything else around there, evergreen trees and everything else. So I think the ability for the sun to do real damage to this stuff is also greatly inhibited relative to most other places, most other locations. And the Pacific Northwest doesn't have the harsh winters that you're going to have, for example, in a Minnesota or Alaska or some such place. So I think there's a pretty good chance that all that stuff is still there and in, relatively speaking, in pretty good shape. Certainly, I think good enough shape for us to identify if we find something and say, yeah, that came from D.B. Cooper. So I'm going to give this like another 8 minutes. This will make an hour and a half, and then I'll wrap it up. So if we have any last questions or what have you, feel free to fire away. I do want to say that I appreciate you joining me this evening, and I encourage you to subscribe to my channel here. I'm trying to build up the numbers, build up the following. So please subscribe to the channel, and as I sort of do these things from time to time, they'll pop up. I'm going to try to be, and I've tried of late to be a little more religious about doing this stuff, doing YouTube lives and that kind of stuff, which I actually enjoy doing. And like I said, I mean, the way I operate in the D.B. Cooper universe is a little different than a lot of other people. I'm very boots on the ground. I'm really digging into, witnesses and going over the math and the science and everything. And so it's an ever evolving sort of investigation on my part. So this is the way to stay in tune with all that. So Jay says, I wonder if Fazio found something but didn't say. Got the sprinklers going on in the back. Hopefully that's not creating too much of a nuisance there. I don't believe so. There was a time where I actually considered, and just out of an abundance of, caution or just doing my due diligence, I mean, I looked at the Fazios and said, is it possible that one of the Fazio brothers was D.B. Cooper and buried the money there? I mean, but ultimately I determined there's no possible way. And I'm not trying to disparage anybody. I'm just like, walking in there completely neutralized, just saying, okay, let's start taking a look at some of the obvious and let's see what's going on here. But I've talked with the Fazios many times about what transpired that day and everything else, the day when the money was found, and and just kind of just business in general there. And I'm absolutely convinced that they had absolutely nothing to do with this. Just like Brian Ingram's family, specifically his late father, Dwayne. I'm convinced that Dwayne had absolutely nothing to do with this. He wasn't part of some big conspiracy, as some people have tossed out there. These people were honestly God-fearing people that were just trying to do the right thing in terms of, contacting the authorities and everything else, and they did their part. And thank goodness for Brian and his family for uncovering this really crucial evidence. It's about all we got as far as the case is concerned, but I do think it tells a story of where D.B. Cooper ended up, and I think it tells us, if nothing more, I believe that it tells us that D.B. Cooper survived and got away. I absolutely believe that, and I believe that D.B. Cooper at this point is probably long gone, dead and gone. As to whether or not there's somebody else out there who knows, a family member or what have you, and just not talking about it, it seems unlikely to me. I mean, it just appears to me that D.B. Cooper, for whatever reason, just took it to his grave. Maybe he told his wife if he was married and the two of them took it to the grave. I don't know. But, I mean, obviously, if there's a grandson or somebody of that nature who discovered that their grandfather was the real D.B. Cooper, I mean, that person could cash in. That'd be worth a lot of money. So, and it's not like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, because it's a very interesting story. So I would love it if somebody came out and said, yeah, my grandfather was D.B. Cooper, and told the story and cashed in. I mean, I have no issue with that. I mean, I'm a capitalist and an American, so good on them. So having said that, I don't think that the real D.B. Cooper and the real D.B. Cooper's family has ever come to light. I think at this point, I have to say that I think D.B. Cooper is still a complete unknown. I don't believe we have any idea what his real name is at this point. It's not to say that won't turn around quickly, but at this point in time, I have not seen a single person of interest, suspect, whatever the case may happen to be, that I believe is D.B. Cooper. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so, but maybe I'm wrong. But I think he's still a complete mystery. That the real D.B. Cooper is still a complete mystery and a complete unknown. But again, I do believe that will change. I'm on the record as saying that I believe it'll change by the 60th anniversary, which is 6 years away. It's coming up. It's only 6 years away. So let's do a few more minutes here. Any final questions or what have you? Jay says, did Tina put the money there on Tina Bar? She lived near there. Well, she didn't really live near there. She eventually did. But I don't know why Tina would have done that. It makes no sense to me. And I think all of the crew were just like innocent people who got just sort of, wrapped up into this thing. And they're just a part of history, which 54 years out, I think a lot of us, myself included, actually is kind of cool in a way. It's like, wow, I mean, that's kind of cool to actually be a part of like history and a true like great American mystery like this, globally like this. Somebody like a Bill Mitchell who actually saw the real guy, or a Tina Mucklow, or the pilots that flew the jet or what have you. I mean, I think it's really kind of a cool thing, but I don't think that there's anything more to it than that. I know that human nature is such that people try to, they need answers. They need answers to perplexing problems, mysteries, that kind of thing. And it's just inevitable that the longer that time goes by and, things remain mysteries, people start getting really haywire and crazy and eccentric with their theories and things of that nature. So I think that discussions of the crew being involved, or D.B. Cooper hiding in a secret panel on the jet, and then after the authorities checked the plane out, running away, I just think is sort of crazy people talk. There's just absolutely nothing at all to back that up. I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again. At the end of the day, why did DB Cooper get away? I think DB Cooper managed to get away, at least up to this point, because he was just one step ahead of the authorities and he didn't talk. That's it. He just stayed one step ahead and didn't talk. Didn't brag about it, didn't go to the bar, talk with his buddies about it. He just remained quiet. And I believe that that, by and large, explains how he's managed to evade the grasp of law enforcement, and even us private citizens, for 54 years now. But again, I do think it's destined to change. Eventually, that'll change. So, Matt, I'm going to give you the final question here. Matt says, could the money packets have fallen out of his jacket during the jump? Again, if he jumped where I think he jumped, that doesn't explain the money on Tina Bar. I mean, it seems pretty clear now that where DB Cooper actually jumped was, what is that, maybe 35 miles, 40 miles away from where the money was found on Tina Bar. So that's just too big of a gap. Like, you don't have money like drifting in the wind 35 miles or whatever. That just doesn't add up. So I do not believe that happened, or at least that accounts for the 3 packets found on Tina Bar. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up at that. A nice clean hour and a half, maybe plus a minute or what have you. And again, I thank you for joining me this evening. If you have any comments or what have you, you can either post them here after this video is posted or this live is posted, or you can send me an email, eric@ericulis.com. I do my best to answer these emails and questions and entertain theories and that type of thing. It's not an excuse, but I do have a very, very, very busy schedule. So a lot of times, if it's kind of something that it seems kind of too outlandish, a lot of times I ignore it and just don't go anywhere with it. But either way, don't be shy as far as that's concerned. Also, again, please like my channel. And also feel free to join the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, the DB Cooper Mystery Group. I'm there. A lot of the people that are pretty much everybody who's anybody in the case is there. And it's a pretty cool group. Everybody's laid back and chill and is willing to talk about theories and persons of interest, suspects, all kinds of things, and answer questions. There are no questions that are stupid or too simple, whatever the case may happen to be. Don't be shy about engaging in DB Cooper Mystery Group. So I'm going to leave it at that, folks. Thanks again for joining in, and we'll do this again shortly. All right, folks. Cheers.